The first thing the night gives you is a smell. Not rain. Not smoke. Pine. A sharp, bright sting that gets into the back of your throat, because the trees out here aren't just trees. They're inventory. They're money. They're sweat trapped in wood. In the Turpentine camp, even the darkness feels like labor. A lantern swings from a nail on the cookhouse porch, throwing a slow circle of light across packed sand and scattered chips of bark. Beyond that circle, just black trunks, straight as fence posts, and a wet hush from the bog. A mule shifts in its traces, metal rings click, a man coughs, and somewhere behind the bunk shacks, a boy laughs once, too loud, then cuts it off like he remembered where he is. It's late. Later than anyone should be awake if morning is coming early. But the foreman's voice carries through the camp like a whip crack, even when he's not holding one. "Head count," he says. Men step out, shoulders hunched, boots scuffing the sand. They line up by the commissary wall, faces half lit, eyes down. Then the teenagers. You can tell them by their posture. Not used to being folded in on themselves yet. Still growing into their bodies. Still thinking the world might hold something better than this line. 4 boys. 2 girls. All of them tired. All of them too young to have hands that look like theirs already do. A clerk with ink-stained fingers holds a ledger and reads names like they're items. One by one, answers, until he says a name and the night doesn't answer back. He waits, says it again. Nothing. The foreman's jaw tightens. He looks toward the bunk shack where the teenagers sleep. The lantern swings, the circle of light sways, and in that movement, just for a moment, you see what's wrong. A door hanging slightly open, a blanket on the ground, a footprint in the sand that doesn't belong to a barefoot boy. Boot tread, heavy, adult. The foreman turns his head slowly, as if too sudden emotion will make the truth solid. "Where are they?" he asks. Nobody answers. Because in this place, the question isn't just about missing teenagers. It's about what happens when something valuable goes missing from a system designed to keep people from ever being missed at all. And in 1893, in the Pine Belt of Alabama, where the trees are owned, the land is owned, and the law often behaves like it's owned too, kids don't simply vanish. They're taken. Or they're erased. Or they're made into a story that keeps everyone else obedient. So here's the question that haunts the camp like pine smell in cloth. If 6 teenagers can be pulled out of their bunks at night and never be seen again, who was brave enough to do it? And who was powerful enough to make sure no one asked too loudly? A brief warning. This story deals with abduction, coerced labor, and violence in a historical setting. I'll keep the details restrained because the point isn't shock. The point is the machinery, how it moves, how it hides, and how sometimes ordinary people manage to jam their hands into its gears. The camp called Cedar Hollow. They called it Cedar Hollow, though there wasn't much cedar about it. It sat in a flat stretch of pine woods outside a railroad spur town that barely counted as a dot on a map. One street, a feed store, a church that doubled as a meeting hall and a place to cry without being seen. Cedar Hollow was not a town. It was a camp. A cluster of rough shacks, a commissary with a lock that didn't trust anyone, a cookhouse that smelled like fat and ash, and the still yard where the gum, raw pine resin, was cooked down into turpentine and rosin. Everything there had a purpose, even the people. Most of the men were seasonal hands, pulled in by debt, by hunger, by promises that sounded like opportunity if you squinted. Some were there because the alternative was jail. Some were there because they'd already been in jail, and the camp was the next link in a chain they didn't understand until it tightened. And then there were the teenagers. The camp bosses liked them for the same reason they liked mules. They were strong enough to work and young enough to be controlled. The official story was simple. "These young ones are learning a trade," the bosses would say. The truth was uglier. They were learning what it felt like to have your time stolen while the sun rose and set without asking your permission. The camp ran on rhythm. Dawn. The chipping. Long, shallow cuts in the pine bark, carefully angled to make the tree bleed gum down into clay cups. Midday, the dipping. Men and boys moving through rows of trees with buckets, pouring thick resin into barrels. Evening, the still. Fire under the copper belly, steam rising, rosin boiling, turpentine dripping into coils where it cooled into clear liquid that smelled like money. Night, sleep. Or at least what passed for sleep, because even at night the camp listened. To footsteps, to whispers, to the far-off hoot of an owl that sounded like laughter, if you were already scared. The teenagers. The first thing to know about the teenagers who vanished is that they were not a faceless group. The camp tried to make them that, but they had names, habits, small hopes. Jonah Price, 16, who could carve a little bird out of pine scrap with a pocket knife he kept hidden in his boot. Eddie Vaughn, 15, who sang quietly when he thought no one was listening. Old hymns that made the air feel less heavy. Calvin Cal Brooks, 17, tall and stubborn, with shoulders already broad from work he should not have been doing. Mason Lee, 14, still with a boy's face under the dirt. And the two girls. Hattie Walker, 16, who worked in and around the cookhouse and could flip a biscuit in a pan without burning it, even when she was exhausted. Pearl Whitcomb, 15, who kept a ribbon in her hair until the foreman told her it was foolish. And then she kept it anyway, tucked under her scarf like a secret. They weren't all from the same family. They were connected by the same fragile thread. A promise. Work a season. Help your folks. Get out. But Cedar Hollow wasn't built for people to leave clean. It was built to keep people owing. The commissary made sure of that. A tin of coffee, a sack of flour, a pair of boots. All of it marked up, all of it tracked in a ledger, all of it treated like a kindness that became a chain. And when the teenagers disappeared, that ledger would become something else. Not a record of debts, a record of lies. The men who ran it. The camp manager was a man named Roark, not his real name, most likely. Few men like him used names they could be chased by. He wore clean shirts and kept his boots polished, which told you everything you needed to know. He didn't work. He supervised. He watched. And he spoke the language of order. Rules, he liked to say. We have rules here. The foreman was different. Silas Dern. A hard, wiry man with eyes like nails and hands like knots. He was the one the camp feared because he made the rules physical. And then there was the clerk, a young white man named Thomas Lyle. Not a boss, not a worker, a paperman. He kept the ledger, he wrote the marks, he counted heads, he stamped receipts. He told himself he was just doing a job. That lie is old. It's one of the oldest, because in systems like Cedar Hollow, the paperman is often the hinge. He doesn't swing the hammer. He just makes sure the hammer looks legal after it falls. The first missing morning. The disappearances didn't announce themselves with drama. They arrived like a wrong note. The next morning, dawn came the way it always did. Gray, humid, mosquitoes already hungry. The cookhouse bell clanged. Men shuffled out. The line formed. 6 teenagers didn't. At first, the foreman's irritation looked like the usual kind. Work was delayed. Trees didn't wait. Resin didn't care. But when the bunk shack door was found half open and the sleeping pallets were empty, blankets tossed, a tin cup on its side, the irritation changed into something tighter. Not worry, not concern. Calculation. Because if teenagers ran, it meant trouble. Not moral trouble. Business trouble. Runaways meant questions. Questions meant inspectors. Inspectors meant paperwork that couldn't be controlled. Roark came out in his clean shirt and looked at the empty pallets like a man looking at spilled grain. "Run off," he said. Silas Dern shook his head. "They didn't pack," he said. Roark's jaw moved. "They didn't need to," he replied. "That's the thing about power. It prefers simple stories. Runaways, vagrants, bad kids. And in 1893, a missing black teenager could be filed under wandered off, the same way a missing tool could be filed under lost. But Cedar Hollow had a problem. The teenagers weren't only labor. They were known. Their families lived close enough to ask. And those families did ask. They asked at the commissary. They asked at the camp gate. They asked the preacher. They asked the railroad men. They asked anyone who might have seen 6 young bodies move through the woods in the dark, and the answers they got were not answers. They were warnings. "Mind your business." They ran. "You don't want trouble." The mothers heard those warnings like a slap, because a mother knows what her child's fear sounds like. And they ran didn't sound right. Not in a place where the woods were thick, the swamps were hungry, and a teenager without supplies was more likely to be found dead than free. If they'd run, the camp would have found them, or the woods would have. But nothing surfaced. No bodies, no torn clothes, no footprints leading into the bog. Just absence. Clean, too clean. The woman who refused the lie. If this story has a spine, it's a woman named Mary Price, Jonah's mother. Mary was not educated in the way the paper world measured education, but she had a mind like a trap. She listened, she remembered, and she understood something that the camp men didn't realize she understood. Systems always leave seams. Mary came to Cedar Hollow on the 2nd day after Jonah vanished. She didn't come alone. She came with Hattie's aunt, Pearl's older brother, and Reverend Amos Bell from the church in the spur town. They walked up the sandy road toward the camp gate. The pines stood tall on either side, straight and indifferent. The gate wasn't much, 2 posts and a chain, but it might as well have been iron. Silas Dern met them there. He didn't lift a hand in greeting. He just blocked the way. "Camp's working," he said. Mary looked past him. She saw men moving among trees. She saw barrels. She saw smoke rising from the still yard. She saw the commissary door, and she saw the ledger man, Thomas Lyle, crossing the yard with a stack of papers. Mary called out, "Where's my boy?" Silas's eyes narrowed. "Run off," he said. Mary didn't flinch. "My boy don't run into swamp at night with no shoes," she said. Silas's mouth tightened. Reverend Amos stepped forward, calm voice, Bible in hand. "We're asking as neighbors," he said. Silas laughed once. "Neighbors," he repeated. He leaned closer. "Only neighbors that matter here are the ones who pay," he said. Mary stepped up so close the smell of turpentine and sweat hit her face. "Then let me talk to the man who pays," she said. Silas's eyes flashed. "You keep your tone," he warned. Mary's voice stayed steady. "I'm keeping my boy," she said. That line, simple, stubborn, shifted something, because it was not a plea, it was a claim, and claims are dangerous. Silas turned his head and shouted for Roark. The manager arrived with his clean shirt and his polite face. "Ma'am," he said like he cared. "I'm sorry for your worry. The young ones wandered off. It happens." Mary stared at him. "It don't happen 6 at once," she said. Roark's smile thinned. "Work is hard," he said. "Young folks get restless." Mary's eyes didn't leave his. "You got a list," she said. Roark blinked. "A list?" Mary nodded toward the clerk. "That boy with the papers," she said. "He got a book. You write down what folks owe. You write down what they do." Roark's smile returned, practiced. "That's camp business," he said. Reverend Amos's voice was gentle. Then it's business that involves children, he said, and the Lord's children, too. Silas snorted. Roark lifted a hand. No need for sermons, he said. If your young ones return, we'll send word. Mary's chest rose. And if they don't? Roark's smile held. Then the woods took them, he said. That was the moment. The moment the lie turned into cruelty. Because he wasn't just saying, I don't know. He was saying, you will accept not knowing. Mary took one step back. She looked at the camp, at the smoke, at the men working, at the ledger boy. And then she did the thing power never expects from someone it has trained to fear. She turned away. Not defeated. Deciding. The search that wasn't allowed. The community searched anyway. Not with official support, with lanterns, with dogs. With bare feet and aching knees. They searched the pine rows where the resin cups hung like small mouths. They searched the bog edge where the water swallowed sound. They searched the railroad spur, the creek crossings, the abandoned cabins. They looked for torn cloth, a shoe, a ribbon, a footprint. They found nothing. And the nothing began to feel like a message, because if the woods had taken 6 teenagers, the woods would have left something. A sign, a trace. But there were no traces. Just one thing. A scrap of blue ribbon, caught on a nail behind the commissary. Pearl's ribbon, the one she hid under her scarf. Mary held it in her hand like it might speak. Reverend Amos watched her face. That's not the woods, he said quietly. Mary didn't answer. She didn't need to. Thomas Lyle and the ink. If you want to understand how a place like Cedar Hollow can swallow teenagers, you have to understand the clerk. Thomas Lyle was 22. He came from a small town north where his father had been a shopkeeper and his mother had wanted him to be respectable. So he took a job in the Turpentine business because it promised steady pay and a step above manual labor. He didn't see himself as a villain. He saw himself as a man with ink instead of resin. On the 3rd day after the disappearances, Thomas sat at the commissary desk with the ledger open. Pages of names, marks, debts, and then, tucked between ordinary entries, flour 2 pounds, boots 1 pair, he saw something that made his stomach tighten. 6 names, all teenagers, and beside each name, a mark he hadn't written. A single letter. T, then a number, not a debt, a tally. Thomas flipped back through older pages. He found the same mark beside other names, mostly young, mostly new. And when he followed those names forward in time, he noticed what happened next. Their entries stopped. No more flour, no more coffee, no more boots, no more anything. They vanished from the paper, not like men who quit. Like men who were removed. Thomas felt his throat go dry. He listened. Outside, the camp moved as usual. A barrel rolled. A mule snorted. Somebody laughed near the still yard. He turned another page, and there, in the back of the ledger, a place he rarely looked, was a separate list. Not debts, names, weights, ages, and beside some names, a destination, a place name, a camp name, a rail stop, the kind of list you make when you're shipping things. Thomas stared. His fingers trembled. He closed the ledger. Then he opened it again, as if that would change what it said. It didn't. The truth stayed. Neat. In ink. The night wagon. That same night, Thomas didn't sleep. He lay on his pallet in the clerk's small shack and listened to the camp's sounds. The creak of boards, the distant murmur of men, the drip-drip of resin in the cups outside. Then, wheels. Soft. Controlled. A wagon moving slow so it wouldn't draw attention. Thomas sat up. He looked through the crack in his wall. Moonlight cut thin lines through the pine trunks. He saw silhouettes. 3 men. one with a lantern covered by cloth, one with a rifle slung, and Silas Dern walking beside the wagon like he owned the night. The wagon rolled toward the still yard. Not toward the road, not toward town. Toward the place where fire and steam could hide things. Thomas's heart hammered. He watched until the wagon disappeared behind the rosin sheds. Then he did something that would change the rest of his life. He got up. He pulled on his boots, and he followed. Not close, just close enough to see. The still yard at night was a different world. The fire under the copper belly glowed low. The air smelled like hot pine and metal. Steam hissed softly from a valve. Thomas crept along the edge of the shed. He heard voices, Silas's low and sharp, another man, Roark's smooth tone, and then something else, a muffled whimper. Thomas froze. His breath stopped. A whimper is not the sound of a runaway. It's the sound of someone being held. He leaned closer. Through a crack in the shed wall, he saw movement. Not faces. Not clearly, but hands, young hands, bound, and a strip of cloth on a girl's head, a scarf, Pearl's scarf. Thomas's stomach rolled. He backed away. A board creaked under his boot. Silas's head snapped up. Thomas didn't wait. He ran. Not toward the camp gate, not toward the bunk shacks, toward the one place in this whole system that still had a chance of being moral. The church. Reverend Amos gets a visitor. Thomas reached the spur town before dawn. He knocked on Reverend Amos Bell's door like the devil was behind him. Amos opened it in a nightshirt, lamp in hand. "Thomas?" he said, surprised. Thomas's voice came out rough. "They didn't run," he whispered. Amos's face hardened. "Who?" "The young ones," Thomas said. "Jonah, Eddie, Hattie, Pearl, all of them." Amos stepped back. "Come in," he said. Thomas sat at the small table in the parsonage kitchen, hands shaking around a cup of water he couldn't drink. He spoke in fragments, a mark in the ledger, a list of names, a night wagon, a shed, bound hands. Amos listened without interrupting. When Thomas finished, Amos said one sentence. "Can you prove it?" Thomas's eyes flicked up. "I can show you the ledger," he said. Amos nodded. "Then we need more than prayer," he said. Thomas swallowed. "You think Sheriff will help?" he asked. Amos's laugh was soft and bitter. "The sheriff eats at Roark's table," he said. Thomas's face went pale. Amos stood. "Then we go higher," he said. Thomas stared. Higher?" Amos's eyes were steady. "There are men in Montgomery who like to pretend they don't know what happens in Pine Woods," he said. "Sometimes they need the embarrassment." Thomas shook. "They'll kill me," he whispered. Amos leaned closer. "They'll kill those children," he replied, "if they haven't already." Thomas flinched. Amos's voice softened. "You came here," he said. "That means the part of you that still belongs to God isn't dead. Don't bury it now." Thomas closed his eyes. Outside, the sky began to lighten. Dawn. And somewhere in Cedar Hollow, the camp bell would ring like nothing had happened. The first confrontation. By midday, word moved through the black community like fire through dry grass. Not as rumor, as determination. Mary Price stood on the church steps with Pearl's ribbon tucked in her pocket. Hattie's aunt stood beside her, jaw set. Eddie's father stared at the dirt like he was trying to see footprints in it. And Reverend Amos told them what Thomas had told him. Not every detail, not yet, just enough. "They have a ledger," he said. "And a list." Mary's eyes narrowed. "They put my boy on paper," she said. Amos nodded. "And paper can travel," he said. They formed a small group. Amos, Mary, 2 other men from the church, and Thomas, wearing his clerk's coat like camouflage. They went back to Cedar Hollow in daylight. Not sneaking. walking. If Silas wanted to make them vanish, he would have to do it under the sun. Silas met them at the commissary, as expected. Roark was there too, leaning against the doorframe like a man watching weather. Thomas walked past them, straight to the desk. Silas's voice snapped. "Boy," he said. Thomas didn't stop. His hand went to the ledger. Roark's smile vanished. "Now hold on," he said, stepping forward. Amos's voice rose, calm and public. "We're here for the record," he said. Roark's eyes flicked to Amos. "Your church business ends at the church," he said. Amos nodded. "And your business ends when it becomes kidnapping," he replied. The word hung. Kidnapping. Silas's face went flat. Roark's eyes sharpened. "Careful," he said. Thomas grabbed the ledger. Silas moved. A quick step. A hand reaching. Mary moved too. She stepped between Silas and Thomas like she didn't understand fear. "You touch him," she said, voice low. "And you touch all of us." Silas stared at her. The campyard went quiet. Men paused in their work, pretending not to look while looking anyway. Roark's voice softened, false. "Ma'am," he said, "you're upset. Let's talk this out." Mary held his gaze. "You've been talking," she said. "Now we reading." Thomas clutched the ledger to his chest. Amos nodded. "We're taking this," he said. Silas's hand twitched. Roark's eyes slid toward the still yard, toward the men with rifles, toward the unseen threat. And that was the moment Thomas realized something else. The camp didn't need to kill people in public. It just needed to make the road out feel dangerous. Amos seemed to sense it too. He lifted his chin. "We walk out together," he said. They did. Slow, public. The ledger held like a newborn. Mary beside Thomas, Amos on the other side, Silas watching, teeth tight, Roark watching, face smooth again, and as they reached the gate chain, Roark called out. "That book belongs to the company," he said. Amos didn't turn around. "So do those children in your mind," he said. "That's the problem." They walked back down the sandy road. The pines stood straight. The air smelled like resin, and behind them, Cedar Hollow went back to work. Which meant one thing. The camp wasn't finished, not even close. The 2 copies. They didn't take the ledger to Mary's home. That would have been too obvious. They took it to the church. Because the church, in a place like this, was more than a building. It was a refuge, a courthouse, a schoolhouse, a whisper network, and, when necessary, a vault. Reverend Amos sat at the pulpit table and opened the ledger with care. The pages smelled like dust and sweat and cheap ink. Thomas stood beside him, face gray. Mary stood at the aisle end, arms crossed, watching every move like a sentry. Amos didn't read it like a sermon. He read it like a weapon. He traced the lines with his finger. Names, ages, the little tally marks, the letters, the destination notes. And then he did something that Roark never expected. He made copies. Not a perfect copy. No machines, no easy duplication. Just hands, eyes, time. A teacher from town, Miss Clara May, arrived with a stack of blank paper and a bottle of ink. She was a small woman with sharp cheekbones and a calm that felt earned. She sat down beside Amos without asking permission and began transcribing. Name, mark, destination. She wrote like someone who knew that every line could be the difference between missing and stolen. Thomas did the same. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he wrote, not because the room was hot, because every sentence he put on paper was also a confession. They worked until their wrists ached. Until the lantern oil ran low, until the church grew quiet, and then quieter. By midnight there were 2 sets of pages. One remained in the church, hidden beneath a loose floorboard under the pulpit. The other, Amos sealed into an envelope. "Montgomery," he said. Mary's eyes snapped to him. "Who in Montgomery?" Amos's mouth tightened. "A man who owes me a favor," he said. "A clerk in the state offices. Not powerful but placed." Thomas swallowed. "They'll intercept it," he whispered. Amos nodded. "That's why we don't send it by the road," he said. He looked at the window, toward the rail spur. "We send it by train," he said. Mary's jaw set. "Who carries it?" she asked. Amos turned to Thomas. Thomas's eyes widened. "No," he said instinctively. Amos's voice was steady. "You know the papermen," he said. "You can move like one." Thomas's shoulders slumped. "I'm not brave," he whispered. Mary's voice cut through him. "Then borrow it," she said, "from your conscience, before it runs out." Thomas looked at her. For the first time, he saw what she was. Not a grieving mother, a force. He nodded once. "I'll go," he said. The knock in the dark. They didn't make it to morning without the camp reacting, because Cedar Hollow had its own network, its own ears, its own watchers. Just after 2 a.m., while Clara May was rinsing her pen and Amos was hiding the second set of copies under the pulpit, a sound came. A knock. Not on the church door, on the parsonage door next to it. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate. Amos froze. Mary's hand went to her pocket, where Pearl's ribbon sat like a small piece of proof. Thomas's face drained. Clara May whispered, "Don't answer." The knocks came again. Then a voice. Not Silas, not Roark. Someone smoother, someone pretending to be polite. "Reverend," the voice called. "We're here to retrieve company property." Amos's chest rose. He walked to the parsonage window and pulled the curtain back a finger's width. In the moonlight, he saw 2 men. One was a deputy from town. The other was a camp rider. And behind them, in the shadows near the fence line, more shapes. More men. The deputy called again. "Open up, this can be handled civil." Amos's laugh was almost soundless. Civil, a word that meant nothing when spoken by men who came in the night. Mary stepped beside him. "Let them see you," she whispered. Amos hesitated. Mary's eyes held his. "If they think you're hiding," she said, "they'll treat it like guilt." Amos opened the door. Not wide, just enough. Lantern light spilled onto the porch. The deputy's hat brim hid his eyes. "Reverend Bell," he said, "I hear you took a ledger. That's theft." Amos's voice was even. "I took a record of missing children," he replied. The deputy's mouth tightened. "You're making a situation," he said. Amos nodded. "There already is a situation," he said. 6 teenagers are gone." The camp rider stepped forward. His eyes flicked past Amos into the parsonage. "Company wants its book," he said. Mary stepped into view. Her presence changed the air. "Company can come in daylight," she said. The deputy's gaze landed on her. "Mary Price," he said, like a warning. Mary's voice was steady. "You put my name in your mouth like it scares me," she said. "It don't." The deputy's jaw flexed. "Hand over the ledger," he said. Amos shook his head. "Get a warrant," he said. The deputy's smile was thin. "I don't need one," he said. And then the camp rider leaned closer, voice low enough to be private. "You keep pushing," he whispered, "and people start getting hurt." Mary's eyes didn't blink. "People already hurt," she said. For a second, the deputy looked like he might step onto the porch. But then, from across the street, a window shutter creaked. Another, a neighbor watching, and the deputy's posture changed. Because predators prefer privacy, he adjusted his hat. "Fine," he said. We'll do this proper." He stepped back. But as he did, Mary saw something. A man in the shadows lifting a match. Not to light a pipe, to test the wind. Mary's stomach dropped. She grabbed Amos's sleeve. "They're going to burn it," she whispered. Amos's eyes sharpened. Clara May's voice came from behind them, quick and urgent. "Move the copies," she said. Amos didn't hesitate. He closed the door. "Thomas," he said. "Now." Thomas clutched the sealed envelope. Mary shoved Pearl's ribbon into his hand, too. "Keep it with the paper," she said. "Proof likes company." Thomas's eyes widened. Mary's voice softened, just for a breath. "Bring it where it can't be swallowed," she said. Thomas nodded. He slipped out the back, into the dark. And as his footsteps faded, Amos and Mary stood in the parsonage, like two people waiting for lightning. Fire doesn't ask permission. They didn't have to wait long. A smell reached them first. Not pine, not resin. Kerosene. Amos's eyes snapped to the window. A flicker. Orange. Then heat. The church wasn't burning yet, but the outbuilding was. A small shed beside the parsonage where Amos stored wood and old hymnals. Someone had lit it. The flames climbed quick, hungry. Mary ran outside before Amos could stop her. Her skirt hem snapped against her ankles. She grabbed a bucket from the porch. Amos followed, hauling another. Clara May came too, not screaming, not flailing, just moving with cold purpose. They threw water. The fire hissed, but the kerosene fed it. And then Mary saw it, across the street, a silhouette, Silas Dern, watching, not close enough to be accused, close enough to be understood. Mary's chest tightened. She pointed. Amos turned. Silas stepped back into the darkness like a stain. The shed burned down to black ribs. They saved the church. Barely. When the flames died, the night felt quieter than it should, like the world was holding its breath. Amos's voice was rough. "That's your answer," he said. Mary stared at the charred ground. "It ain't an answer," she replied. "It's a dare." The train north Thomas didn't run like a fugitive. He ran like a messenger. He kept to the back alleys of the spur town, avoiding lamplight. He listened for hoofbeats, for wagon wheels, for the casual sound of men out too late. At the rail spur, a freight train waited. Low, heavy cars, steam sighing. The station clerk sat in a little booth with a lantern and a bored expression. Thomas walked up and tried to look ordinary. Tried to look like a man delivering documents. Because in a way, he was. He handed the clerk a coin. "Montgomery?" he said. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "Freight don't care about your envelope," he muttered. Thomas swallowed. "It's for a man named Harland," he said, choosing the name Amos gave him. The clerk squinted, then shrugged. "Put it in the mail sack," he said. Thomas did. He watched the sack get tossed into the baggage car. He watched the door slam. He watched the engine shutter, then move. Steam rose. The train pulled out like it was dragging the entire town behind it. Thomas stood there until the last car disappeared. He didn't feel relief. He felt exposed. Because the moment you stop being useful to a machine, the machine starts thinking about how to remove you. He turned to leave, and froze. At the edge of the platform, leaning against a post, was a man Thomas recognized. Not Silas, not Roark. The deputy, hat brim low, hands in pockets. Waiting like he'd been there all along. Thomas's mouth went dry. The deputy pushed off the post. "Evening," he said. Thomas tried to keep his voice steady. "Evening," he replied. The deputy's smile was small. "Long night," he said. Thomas forced a nod. The deputy stepped closer. "What you send?" he asked. Thomas swallowed. "Church papers," he lied. The deputy's eyes narrowed. He looked down at Thomas's hands and saw something, a strip of blue ribbon peeking from Thomas's coat pocket. Pearls. The deputy's expression changed. Not suspicion. Certainty. "You boys always carry souvenirs?" he asked. Thomas's heart slammed. He took a step back. The deputy stepped forward. "Let's take a walk," he said. Thomas looked around. No one close. The station clerk had gone inside. The platform was empty. The pines beyond the tracks looked darker than before. Thomas's voice came thin. "I need to go home," he said. The deputy's smile held. "Home's where you'll go," he said. "One way or another." Thomas didn't wait for the meaning. He ran, boots pounding the platform, down the track, into the dark. Behind him the deputy shouted once, and then hoofbeats. Someone else. Faster. Thomas turned a corner near the feed store and dove behind a stack of lumber. His breath ripped in and out. He pressed a hand over his mouth to keep from making sound. The hoofbeats passed, paused, then moved on. Thomas stayed there until dawn stained the sky. When he finally stood, his knees shook. But the train was gone. And the envelope, if God was kind, was gone with it. What Cedar Hollow did next, if you've ever watched a snake lose its meal, you know what happens. It doesn't stop hunting. It tightens. Cedar Hollow tightened. Men appeared in town who hadn't been there before. Quiet riders, long coats, eyes that didn't linger on shop windows or church notices. They lingered on people. Mary noticed them. Clara May noticed them. Amos noticed them. The families noticed them. And the missing teenager's name started to be spoken more softly, not because grief got smaller, because danger got closer. On Tuesday, a rumor spread that Jonah Price had been seen walking on the county road. Mary heard it. Her heart lifted for one reckless second. Then she asked who saw him, and nobody could answer. It was a lure, a way to make a mother leave safety. Mary didn't take it. She sat on her porch with a broom in her lap like it was a rifle, and she waited. On Wednesday, the sheriff's office sent a notice. Reverend Amos Bell was accused of stealing company property. The ledger? A warrant would be issued. Mary read the notice twice. Then she laughed, not because it was funny, because it was predictable. "Of course," she said. Power didn't respond to accusation by defending itself. It responded by criminalizing the accuser. On Thursday, someone slipped a note under Clara May's door. One sentence, "Stop writing." Her hand didn't shake when she showed it to Amos, but her eyes did something else. They went distant. She wasn't scared for herself. She was scared for what she knew, and knowledge in this story was a liability. The place names in the back of the ledger. Before the warrant could be served, Amos did one thing. He took Thomas to the church at dawn and lifted the loose floorboard. Clara May's copy pages sat there, dry and crisp. Amos laid them out. He pointed to the destinations, a pine camp name called Red Lick, a rail stop called Bracken, a logging site called Hollow Fork, and one name that made Thomas go pale. "Gulf Works," Thomas whispered. Amos looked at him. "What's that?" Thomas swallowed. "A buyer," he said. "Not a camp. A man who places hands." Mary's voice was quiet. "Places," she repeated, "like people were stones." Thomas nodded. "They sell labor contracts," he whispered. "They call it lawful. They call it indenture." Amos's jaw tightened. "And the teenagers?" he asked. Thomas stared at the paper. "Not listed as teens anymore," he said. He pointed. Beside Jonah's name, the age had been altered, not with a big scribble, with a neat correction. 16 became 18. 15 became 19, because an adult could be contracted. A child would look like kidnapping, even in a world that liked to pretend it wasn't. Mary's fingernails dug into her palm. They changed my boy's age, she said. Amos's voice was low. Paper can do that, he replied. Clara May lifted her pen. And paper can undo it, she said. She began writing letters, not to the sheriff, not to the county, to editors, to church leaders in other towns, to anyone who might turn local terror into public embarrassment. Because embarrassment was one of the few levers the powerless had. The rescue that was too late. On Friday night, Thomas came to Amos with eyes wide. "They're moving them," he whispered. Amos froze. "How do you know?" Thomas swallowed. "I heard Silas," he said, "at the feed store. He said we cleared the trouble before Sunday." Mary's breath caught. Amos's voice tightened. "When?" Thomas hesitated. "Tonight," he said. The plan that formed wasn't heroic. It was desperate. They didn't have deputies. They didn't have guns enough to match a camp. They had three things. Thomas's knowledge of the camp routes, Henry Whitcomb, Pearl's brother, who knew the Pine roads, and the stubborn truth that if they did nothing, the teenagers would be erased into another county, another ledger, another lie. They moved after midnight. 4 men, Mary and Amos. Clara May stayed behind. Not because she wasn't brave, because someone had to keep the paper safe. Mary insisted on going. "No man gonna stop me," she said. Amos didn't argue. He just handed her a lantern and said, "Keep low." They approached Cedar Hollow from the swamp side, where the ground sucked at boots and the mosquitoes came in clouds. The still yard glowed faintly. Not full fire. A low burn. Enough to keep the copper warm. Enough to make shadows dance. They crouched behind a rosin shed. Thomas whispered, "The holding shed is there." He pointed. A low building behind stacked barrels. No light. No movement. Amos's stomach turned. Mary's hands clenched. Henry's breath came sharp. They crept forward, board by board. Mud quieting footsteps. They reached the shed. Thomas put his eye to a crack. His face shifted. "Empty," he whispered. Mary's chest tightened. "Where?" she breathed. A sound answered. Not a voice. A distant whistle. A train. From the rail spur. Amos's eyes snapped. "Now," he said. They ran. Not silently. Not carefully. They ran like time had become a knife. Through pine rows, past sleeping shacks, across Sandy Road. Behind them someone shouted. A lantern flared. A dog barked. Hoofbeats. The camp waking up with anger. They hit the rail spur as the freight train was already moving. Boxcars rolling. Steel wheels screaming faintly. In the weak lantern light, Mary saw a boxcar door half shut. A hand. Small. A sleeve. A scarf. Pearl's scarf. Mary's body moved without thinking. She sprinted towards the car. Amos grabbed her shoulder. "Mary!" She shook him off. She reached for the door. Her fingers caught wood. For a breath she felt it, the vibration of the train, the pull of it, like it wanted to drag her too. Then a rifle barrel pressed into the side of her neck. Silas Dern's voice. Low. Close. "Let go," he said. Mary froze. Her fingers stayed on the door. Silas's breath was hot. "I said let go," he repeated. Amos stepped forward. "Silas," he said, voice controlled, "these are children." Silas's laugh was quiet. "Children," he said, "their hands." Amos's voice hardened. "You're a sinner," he said. Silas's eyes narrowed. "I'm employed," he replied. The boxcar door slid closed the last inch. A latch clicked. The train picked up speed. Mary's hands fell away like the wood burned her. She stumbled back. She stared at the moving cars, eyes wide. No screams, no dramatic outcry, just the steady, unstoppable sound of steel moving away. And that somehow was worse, because it sounded like procedure. Silas leaned closer to Mary's ear. "You don't come back here," he whispered. Mary's voice came out strangled. "That was my son," she said. Silas's rifle eased but didn't lower. "Was," he replied. Amos lunged, not at Silas, at the truth. He grabbed Silas's coat front. Silas moved fast. A shove, a blow. Amos hit the dirt hard. Henry cried out. Thomas stood frozen, face white. Silas aimed the rifle toward them. Behind him, 2 more camp men appeared, rifles raised. The deputy arrived too, stepping into lamplight with a calm that didn't belong in this moment. "Reverend," he said mildly, "you're trespassing." Amos pushed up on his elbows. "Trespassing?" he rasped. The deputy shrugged. "Company property," he said. Mary stared at him. "You standing here with them?" she said, voice shaking with rage. "You see what they doin'?" The deputy's gaze didn't shift. "I see you causing trouble," he replied. And just like that, the night clarified. It wasn't camp versus town. It was power versus people. The train vanished into the dark. The last car's lantern winked once, then disappeared. Mary didn't scream. She didn't beg. She stood in the dirt, hands shaking, and she looked at Silas like she was memorizing his face for the day God asked her to testify. Amos rose slowly, blood at his lip. He wiped it with the back of his hand. "You can't hide this forever," he said. Silas's expression didn't change. "Watch me," he replied. The week the story died. Locally. After that night, the town changed. Not in loud ways, in quiet ones. The store owner who used to nod at Mary looked away. The sheriff's deputy who used to tip his hat stopped coming down her road. Men who once whispered sympathy now whispered warnings. "They'll take you next," they said. Amos's warrant was served, not with gentleness, with ceremony. 2 deputies came to the church on Sunday morning, while people were still filing in. They stood by the door like they belonged there. Amos preached anyway. He preached with the warrant in his pocket. He preached with the missing teenagers in the air like smoke. At the end, the deputy stepped forward. "Reverend Bell," he said loudly, "you're under arrest." A murmur rolled through the pews. Mary stood. Her voice rose. "For what?" she demanded. The deputy lifted a paper. "Theft," he said. Mary's laugh was sharp. "You stole our children," she said, "and you got the nerve to call this theft?" The deputy's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am," he warned. Mary stepped closer. "Say my boy's name," she said. The deputy's jaw tightened. He didn't. Because names are dangerous, they turn missing into personal. He took Amos, not violently, not kindly, like removing a problem. Mary watched him go with her fists clenched. Then she turned to Thomas. "Did the envelope go?" she asked. Thomas nodded, voice thin. "It went," he said. Mary breathed once, hard. "Then we ain't done," she whispered. Montgomery's silence. If you've ever believed the state will rush to correct cruelty once it's documented, this is where the story hurts. Because the envelope arrived. And it didn't immediately explode into justice. It went onto a desk, then into a folder, then into a pile. Because papers have a way of being buried by other papers. And because the Turpentine business had friends. Money tends to. Days passed, then weeks. Clara May got 1 letter back. 1. From Harland. A short note. I received the materials. I advise caution. The matter is delicate. Delicate. That word did something to Mary's stomach. Delicate meant profitable. Delicate meant dangerous. Delicate meant not worth it, if you were the kind of man who only counted costs that touched you. Mary stared at the note until the paper blurred. Then she folded it carefully. "Fine," she said. If the state wouldn't move fast, she would move louder. The printer who couldn't unsee it. There was a small weekly paper in the next town over. Not a powerful paper, but a paper that traveled, wrapped around goods, passed between hands, left on benches, read aloud in kitchens. Its printer was a man named Edwin Klein. He wasn't a crusader, he was a businessman, and like most businessmen, he had learned to survive by knowing when to shut up. Mary and Clara May walked into his print shop one afternoon with the copied pages and Pearl's ribbon. Klein looked up from his press, ink on his apron, a cigar stub in his mouth. "What's this?" he asked. Clara May laid the pages down. "A list," she said. Klein scanned the first lines. His brow tightened. Mary placed the blue ribbon on top. Klein's eyes flicked to it. "What am I looking at?" he asked. Mary's voice was steady. "You're looking at children being shipped like barrels," she said. Klein's throat moved. He read more. Name, age altered, destination. He swallowed. "That's serious," he said. Mary leaned in. "It's true," she replied. Klein's gaze lifted. "Truth gets people killed," he said. Mary didn't flinch. "Silence already did," she replied. Klein stared at her. He looked at the ribbon again, then at the pages. He exhaled smoke. "Who's the clerk?" he asked. Clara May answered. "Thomas Lyle," she said. Klein's eyes widened. "A white boy?" he asked. Mary nodded. "He saw it," she said. "He wrote it." Klein's face shifted. Not because he suddenly cared more, because he suddenly understood how publishable it was. A white witness, paper evidence, a list. Klein rubbed his chin. "If I print this," he said slowly, "they'll come for me." Mary's voice didn't change. "They already comin'," she said. "They just ain't said your name yet." Klein stared. Then he nodded. "Give me one night," he said. The article that sparked the wrong fire Klein printed a story, not the full list, not every name. He wasn't suicidal, but he printed enough. He printed the pattern. He printed the accusation. He printed the idea that Cedar Hollow wasn't a camp. It was a pipeline. The paper hit benches and counters like a thrown stone. People read it. Some shook their heads. Some muttered. Some pretended they didn't see it. And Cedar Hollow responded. Not by answering, by striking. The print shop burned 2 nights later. No one was inside. Klein had a habit of sleeping at his sister's on Fridays. He stood in the street watching his press collapse into sparks, face pale. Mary stood beside him. "You should have slept there every night," she said softly. Klein's voice was raw. "I didn't think they'd—" Mary cut him off. "I did," she said, "because mothers who've had their children taken stop being surprised by cruelty. They just catalog it." Klein turned to her. "Will it matter?" he asked. Mary stared at the flames. "It matters to me," she said. The disappearance of the clerk. 2 days after the print shop burned, Thomas Lyle didn't show up at the church. That alone would have been strange. Thomas had been living like a man hunted by his own conscience. He came often. He asked for forgiveness without using the word. So when he didn't appear, Clara May went to his shack. She knocked, no answer. She tried the door. Unlocked. Inside, the room looked staged. Pallet rolled, a few papers scattered, a chair tipped, but not like a struggle, like a performance meant to suggest one. Clara May's stomach sank. She saw his boots. Still there. That meant he hadn't left by choice. She found Amos's Bible on the shelf. The one Thomas sometimes read like it might explain how to be a man again. It was open. A page folded down, a marker. Clara May read the verse, though her hands shook. It was about truth, not a comfort, a warning. She closed the book. Outside, a wagon rolled past too slowly. A man in the seat turned his head, watched her. Clara May stepped back. She walked away without running, but her mind was already racing. Thomas was gone. And if Thomas was gone, then the camp had reclaimed its hinge, or broken it. Amos sat in the county jail. Mary sat on her porch. Clara May sat at her table, writing letters faster than her ink could dry. And the teenagers. The teenagers were a moving target now, if they were still alive. That was the hardest part. In a system like this, you never knew when disappearance turned into death. Sometimes it happened immediately. Sometimes it happened later, quietly, when a body became inconvenient. And sometimes the person lived, but not as themselves. Chasing the destinations. Clara May did what paper people do when the world refuses to cooperate. She followed the record. She took the copied pages and marked the destinations. Red Lick, Bracken, Hollow Fork, Gulf Works. She sent messages through church networks, not formal, not official, human. A cousin in Bracken, a deacon in Hollow Fork, a midwife who traveled between camps. She asked one question. Have you seen these names? Weeks passed. Then a reply. From Bracken, a deacon wrote back on rough paper. No names. But there are boys here called New Hands. Young, quiet, guarded. Clara May read it twice. Then she walked to Mary's porch. Mary opened the letter. Her fingers trembled. Bracken, Mary whispered. Clara May nodded. Mary stood. We go, she said. Clara May's voice was soft. Mary, she said, we can't storm a camp. Mary's eyes were empty of fear now. I ain't storming, she said. I'm searching. Mary traveled with Pearl's brother, Henry Whitcomb, and Eddie's father. They went to Bracken like ordinary travelers. A wagon, a few supplies, clothes that didn't look like they belonged to a mission. They arrived at a rail stop that smelled like oil and pine. The camp outside town was guarded, not by uniformed law, by men with rifles and lazy confidence. Mary watched from a distance. She watched boys move barrels. She watched shoulders slump. She watched faces turn away. She didn't see Jonah. She didn't see Eddie. She didn't see Cal. She didn't see Mason. She didn't see Hattie. She didn't see Pearl. But she saw something. A girl. Young, hair wrapped, walking with a limp. She carried a bucket, and on her wrist a strip of cloth. Blue, not ribbon, not the same, but close enough to make Mary's chest tighten. Mary stepped back into the trees. She didn't rush. She didn't cry out, because calling a name in that place would be like throwing a match into gasoline. She stayed 2 days, watching, listening. At night she heard singing. A low hymn. Not loud, like someone trying to remember who they were. Eddie sang hymns. Mary closed her eyes. Her hand covered her mouth. Because hope, in this story, wasn't a warm feeling. It was a knife twisting. She tried to get close. A guard stopped her. Camp's private, he said. Mary's voice was calm. I'm looking for my boy, she said. The guard's eyes didn't soften. No boys here, he said. Mary looked past him, at the young hands, at the faces that wouldn't meet her eyes, and she understood. Even if Jonah was here, he wouldn't be Jonah. He'd be a number, a new hand, a corrected age, a story someone else wrote. Mary left Bracken with nothing but a stronger suspicion, and suspicions don't hug you back. The county's verdict back home, the county moved quickly on the only case it wanted to prosecute. Amos's. They called it theft. They called it incitement. They called it disruption of commerce. The judge didn't care about missing teenagers. The judge cared about order, and order, in this place, meant profit. Amos stood in court with his Bible in hand. Mary sat behind him. Clara May sat beside Mary with her hands folded tight. The deputy testified. Roark testified. They said the teenagers ran. They said Amos stole a ledger. They said the community was hysterical. When Amos spoke, he didn't scream. He didn't plead. He said one thing. Tell me where they are, he said. The judge banged his gavel. That's not the question, he snapped. Amos's eyes held steady. It's the only question, he replied. The judge sentenced him. Not long. Long enough. Long enough to send a message. Speak up, and the law will find a way to punish you. Mary walked out of the courthouse with her chin high. But when she reached the steps, she stopped. She looked at the courthouse door. She looked at the men in hats. She looked at the deputy. Then she looked at Clara May. We ain't getting help from here, Mary said. Clara May nodded. We don't need their permission, she replied. The last trace months passed. Summer thickened into heat that felt like wet cloth. Mosquitoes multiplied. Pines kept bleeding resin. Turpentine kept running into barrels, and the teenagers remained missing. But then, a trace. A rail worker came to Clara May one evening with his hat in his hands. He didn't want to be seen. He didn't want to be named. He just wanted to unload something from his conscience. He handed Clara May a scrap, a piece of cloth, blue, faded, frayed. Clara May's breath caught. Where'd you get it? She whispered. The rail worker's voice was low. Boxcar, he said. Months back, door snagged it. Clara May held it like it might burn her. Did you see them? She asked. The rail worker shook his head. No, he said. But I heard. Clara May's voice tightened. Heard what? The rail worker swallowed. Crying, he whispered. Then nothing. Clara May's eyes closed. Because a boxcar doesn't tell you what happened inside it. It just tells you that people were treated like freight. She took the cloth to Mary. Mary held it. Her fingers moved over the frayed edge. She didn't collapse. She didn't wail. She just sat very still, as if movement might shatter her. This ain't Pearl's ribbon, Mary said. Clara May shook her head. No, she whispered. But it's proof. Mary's voice came flat. Proof don't bring them home, she said. Clara May's throat tightened. No, she admitted, but it tells the truth where the men won't. Mary looked out at the pines. They took them, she said. Clara May nodded. And the camp kept running, she replied. Mary's mouth twisted. That's what makes it murder, she said. Not just that they gone, that the world kept turning like they never mattered. What never seen again really means. When people say never seen again, it sounds like a clean line, a stop, an end. But in stories like this, never seen again is a kind of fog. Because there are possibilities, some of them worse than others. Maybe the teenagers died in transit. Maybe they were killed because living witnesses were inconvenient. Maybe they were sold into other camps under new names, and they lived long, exhausted lives being called something else. Maybe one of them escaped and hid so deep that even the people who loved them couldn't find them. Maybe they became adults who avoided their own past, because remembering felt like dying. The cruelest part is that uncertainty becomes another weapon. It keeps a mother awake. It keeps a community quiet. It makes hope and grief fight inside the same chest every day. Mary Price lived with that fight. So did Hattie's aunt. So did Eddie's father. So did Pearl's brother. They didn't get funerals. They didn't get graves. They got the absence, and the knowledge that the men responsible had built a system strong enough to turn absence into routine. The legacy of Cedar Hollow. Cedar Hollow didn't close immediately. Of course it didn't. Machines like that don't stop because someone points at them. They stop when profit shifts, when scrutiny becomes expensive, when the lies get too heavy to carry quietly. But Cedar Hollow did change. After the print shop burned, after Amos's arrest, after the whispers reached Montgomery and then drifted farther, the camp's managers became more cautious, more careful about moving children, more careful about paper, more careful about night wagons. And that's a bitter kind of victory. Not justice, just adaptation. The real legacy wasn't what happened to Roark or Silas. Men like them rarely get the ending people want. The real legacy was the network that formed in response. Clara May's letters, Mary's refusal, the deacons in other towns watching for new hands, mothers learning to keep records, churches learning to hide copies, communities learning that the only way to fight disappearance is to become impossible to erase. Because the camp's power was never just guns, it was narrative. It was the ability to say, they ran, and have the world accept it. Mary Price broke that, not completely, but enough to leave a crack, and cracks matter. Cracks are how light gets in. Closing reflection. The Alabama Turpentine camp murders of 1893 aren't only about 6 teenagers taken at night. They're about how industries can hide crimes behind routine, how paperwork can disguise kidnapping, how a ledger can turn a child into a hand, and how, in a place where the law was supposed to protect, the law often acted like a guard dog for profit. But they're also about something else. A clerk who finally looked at the ink and admitted what it was doing. A teacher who turned paper into a weapon. A preacher who chose prison over silence. And a mother who refused the easiest lie in the world, that her child simply disappeared. Because disappeared makes it sound like the night did it. Like the woods did it, like the swamp did it. But this story doesn't smell like swamp. It smells like pine, and money, and men who believed the darkness belonged to them. So here are the questions I want to leave you with. If you lived near Cedar Hollow in 1893, if you depended on that camp for wages, for food, for survival, would you have risked speaking up when the teenagers went missing? And in our world now, where systems can still make people vanish, through paperwork, through bureaucracy, through neglect, what does it take for you to stop accepting "they're just gone" as an answer? Because Mary Price never accepted it. And even though she never got the ending she deserved, she did something that matters. She made the lie harder to tell. She made the names harder to erase. She forced the night to leave a record